Hello again. I hope that you have all received your entrees. Please continue to eat. We're going to begin our program. So I wanted to take a minute to just tell you how this whole event came about. As a historian, you always want to know the history of something. And much of this is due in part to one of our guest speakers, Spiros or Stan Drainos, whom I met in Greece, and he has come all the way from Athens over here, an expert on Andreas Papandreou, has written a wonderful biography. Please buy it. I had been given the Senator Nicholas Petras lecture. It had come to Sacramento State from San Francisco State when they closed the program. And I wanted to have an incredible speaker. So when speaking with Mr. Drainos, we talked and I said, who else would be more appropriate than George Papandreou? Connection to Berkeley, connection to Petras. There was a long connection there. So when we asked George, and he so graciously said, yes, he would come. He came and he spoke yesterday, but this is not the first stop in his visit to California. Next, he will be going down to UCLA to go see the faculty there, the Hellenic program, to also visit the fires, and sorry for all of the losses that are happening there. And then he's going to return to sunny San Francisco to go visit UC Berkeley, that has a Kazantzakis program, admirably, brilliantly led by Dr. Christine Filiou, who's over there from UC Berkeley. Thank you for coming. And Dr. Akasami Newsom from UC Berkeley. Thank you. So he's going to be having a lovely tour of California. I even had some connections to get some beautiful weather, and fortunately it's all worked out. So everything is good. So let us begin. To do the introduction of Papandreou, I'd like to call upon Sotiris Kolokotronis, a tour de force in the Sacramento development area. And he will say a few words. Thank you, Sotiris.
Thank you, Katerina. Good evening and welcome. I just want to mention that Supervisor Patrick Kennedy has joined us tonight. Thank you very, very much. It's a great honor to introduce our guest speaker to you tonight. Mr. Papandreou, George Papandreou, was Prime Minister of Greece from 2009 to 2011, and it's currently member of its parliament. He represents the Greek Parliament, the Hellenic Parliament, in the Assembly of the Council of Europe, and has led over the years the work of several committees that has been chaired, producing recommendations for advancing democratic institutions, human rights, and the rule of law across all the 47 state members of the Council. His family has played a very significant role in the governance of Greece since the Second World War. There are 3 generations of prime ministers, and we're talking about that earlier this afternoon. You can call it dynasty if it was not earned, because his grandfather served 5 or 6 times in the prison for political prosecution before he became prime minister. His father 2 times before he became prime minister, and our guest speaker has the distinction that didn't serve prison time before he became prime minister. Not yet. He was first elected in the Greek Parliament in 1981, and since then he has served in a lot of government jobs, posts. Minister of Education in the mid-90s, 94 to 96, where he founded the Greek Open University and promoted substantial multicultural programs. Later, in the late 90s, 99 to 2004, he was foreign minister. And at that point, he really promoted peace building and the European integration in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. And he managed the a breakthrough in the Greek-Turkish relationship. In 2004, he was elected leader of his party, PASOK, and it was the first open primary for the party and for the country, a move highly symbolic of his commitment to governance. Through his political career, he has sought to maximize citizen participation through information technologies, really advanced that piece. From 2006 to 2022, he was the president of the Socialist International. It does not sound really great being in this country, but it is a rather centrist group around the world, which is maybe the most prominent global political network. Around the world, Mr. Papandreou has deployed green diplomacy, calling for protecting the environment by placing substantial sustainable development and the epicenter of policymaking and cooperation. During his premiership, very hard time, very unfortunate times, he implemented a series of structural reforms to modernize the country and to avoid the bankruptcy during the debt crisis in 2010. Mr. Papandreou has received many awards. Received the Quadriga Award in the category of Power of Veracity. In 2010, he was named from the Foreign Policy magazine as one of the top 100 global thinkers. And in 2017, he was honored from the International Leadership Association with their Distinguished Leadership Award. Tonight, as Katerina mentioned, Mr. Papandreou will share with us his thoughts about the US and Greece relations since the economic crisis. With that, it's Your Excellency, welcome back to Northern California, where you grew up. Please.
Well, thank you, Sotiris, and thank you for taking me 2 days ago to Justin Timberland's concert. I missed the game yesterday, Kings, but congratulations on your win. I was here with many of you speaking about Senator Petris, of course. But I'd like to thank you all for the invitation. Angelo, thank you very much for all you're doing. Thank you for the invitation, but all you're doing for Hellenism. Katerina Lagos. How do you say it? Do you say Lagos or Lagos? Lagos, okay. Lagos is the Greek way, but I thought maybe in England, in English, we'd be Lagos. Mark Wheeler, thank you very much for our cooperation. And all of you, it's an esteemed gathering. I, of course, feel very much a Californian also, having grown up here in Berkeley, but I also share the pain and loss as I watch the beautiful parts of this state, as well as so many households going up in flames. Also, being a Greek, we not only empathize with the plight of those who have been hit with this calamity, but also share the sense of fear and insecurity. We ourselves have witnessed apocalyptic destruction from similar events from the last years in many parts of our beautiful country. So tonight I'd like to begin by focusing on some Greek-American relations. I also want to give you a picture of how I see our country's role in the context of the wider region, the Balkans, the Middle East, Europe, as well, of course, as the global challenges we all face, whether it's climate change or pandemics, or the ongoing wars and geopolitical competition. But let me turn to Greek-US relations. Obviously, the connections between our two countries are long and historical. Early 19th century saw a wave of Philhellenism in America, where many citizens supported the Greek independence from the Ottoman Empire. notable figures such as Samuel Gridley Howe, Jonathan Peckham, Miller, actively participated in the Greek struggle, with Howe even bringing Greek refugees to the United States. American missionaries began arriving in Greece in the early 1800s, aiming to support local Christians and establish educational institutions, laying the foundations for much more cultural exchanges between the two countries. Greece and the US collaborated very closely as allies in World War I and in World War II, fighting Nazism and fascism. After World War II, Greece became a focal point in US foreign policy due to its strategic location and internal conflicts, specifically about the Civil War that took place after the Second World War, and the Truman Doctrine to contain communism actually developed out of the Greek experience of the Civil War. And of course, we have the wave of Greeks coming to the US, either as migrants or as refugees from persecution and wars, with prominent and illustrious careers, such as our good friend Angelo, of course, as well as Nicholas Petris, whom we honored yesterday in an event at Sacramento State. Other than our vibrant Greek-American community, Greece has also influenced America in many ways, beginning with the founding fathers of this nation. Democracy, rule of law, separation of powers, arts and architectural styles, theater and literature, philosophy and science and education, and of course, the Olympic Games. As you know, of course, these relations suffered a severe blowback in the 1960s and 70s due to the US government's then, I believe, foolhardy backing of Greece's brutal military junta. I'm aware that a number of those in the audience today and some of their relatives, some of their friends supported Greece's democratic cause by working to reverse those foolish policies. And on a personal note, I'm very grateful that their efforts included lobbying the US government to secure my father's release from prison. So thank you very much for that solidarity. You see, as we're talking about prison in Greece, it was actually a Medal of Honor because it was a fight for democracy. Speaking in Washington, D.C., shortly after his release, my father and his exile, of course, his first act was to thank those that had helped him. In his speech at the Roosevelt Day dinner of the Americans for Democratic Action, he also posed a question to American policymakers that turned out to be prophetic. He said, "For what reason would the US government prefer to be identified with the brutal forces of oppression rather than with the democratic forces of Greece? It is in the long-term interest of the United States government to be identified with the junta, or is it with the democratic forces?" His statement, of course, was at that time a time when he started to build a resistance movement for democracy. Later on, in reaction to the Nixon administration's cozy relationship with the dictators and its dubious stance over the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, there was a powerful wave of popular anger that swept Greece. And when Turkey resumed its offensive in August in Cyprus, it was the conservative government, actually, the staunchly pro-Western Konstantin Karamanlis, who withdrew Greece from the military wing of NATO. Since then, of course, relations between our two countries have seen a major turnaround. Partly, that turnaround is a result, I think, of the dramatically changed circumstances created by the end of the Cold War. I was foreign minister when we were planning to receive President Clinton. And I had discussed with the US ambassador the need for the historical injury of the US support for the military coup to be redressed. So it certainly didn't hurt. It very much helped. In 1999, President Clinton made the following apology to the Greek people during his visit to Athens. He said, "When the junta took over here in 1967, the United States allowed its interest in prosecuting the Cold War to prevail over its interests, I should say its obligation to support democracy, which was, after all, the cause for which we fought the Cold War." There was a shift in consciousness, at least for major segments of Greek society, lessons learned from these same events. What the junta and the Cyprus tragedy demonstrated is our long tradition of dependency. But let me explain this. Greece, after its liberation from the Ottoman Empire, was a very weak state. And the Greek establishment, the leadership of the time, in order to survive, were always looking for a big brother, for help. But that fostered internal division and polarization in a global world of empire competition. So, for example, the first political parties in Greece were characteristically named the British Party, the French Party, and the Russian Party. No Greek party. So this clientelistic dependency was not only external, but also became a fixture in internal political life. This dependency became part of our political culture. For example, after World War II and the Civil War, the USA sent an envoy, Paul Porter, to report back on how Greece was doing and how the Marshall Plan could alleviate some of the problems. Here are only two phrases of what he wrote, and I quote, "There is really no state here in the Western concept. Rather, we have a loose hierarchy of individualistic politicians, some worse than others, who are so preoccupied with their own struggle for power that they have no time, even assuming capacity, to develop economic policy." And he continues, "There is a pathetic dependence upon the United States. Our presence here is used by the government to arouse unjustified hopes among the people." So how could this change? I believe that the Greek diaspora played a major role in changing this philosophy. During the junta, many Greeks were exiled, and many Greeks of the diaspora became champions of change in Greece. Being part of a diaspora, and I was part of this diaspora, in this case, the Greek diaspora, can give one a special vantage point. Whether we left our country voluntarily or were persecuted and found refuge in a safe haven, we carry an innate desire for a better world. That's part of being diaspora, any diaspora, I think. We are in search of a different future, a better future. We are inherently change makers. And living in exile or abroad as migrants, we could dream, we could envision a very different Greece. We also understood that our woes in Greece had nothing to do with our Greek DNA, but with the institutions and the clientelistic political culture that had developed over the many decades of dependency. We realized that our willingness to prioritize the desires and needs of an outside great power, whether they were British, French, Russian, or even American, was an obstacle to realizing our own potential, our own aspirations, and to live as a free, democratic society and a moral equal. We, as members of the Greek diaspora, had a different sense of what Greeks and Greece could do. It was, if you like, this can-do psychology, a confidence in our capacities, and a vision of a much more democratic and creative homeland. Well, very much in the spirit present here in Californian culture. So this can-do culture, I think, is part of our diaspora culture. Much more confident about what we can do. So it's no coincidence that when PASOK, which came to power in 1981, more than half the members of the cabinet of the government were from the Greek diaspora. The Minister of Education from Indiana, the Undersecretary of Defense from New York, the Minister of Communications and Transportation from Sweden, the Minister of Urban Planning from Italy and Latin America, the Minister of Economy from the United Nations, UNDP, the Minister of Culture, Melina Mercouri from France, the Minister of Industrial Policy, Kostas Simitis, who later on became Prime Minister and only recently passed away, from Germany as a professor, and many more, even from far-off Australia. We brought with us the belief that progressive change was both necessary but also possible. This shift in consciousness became the steam engine for reform in Greece. Change, or alayi, as Mr. Papalexopoulos said yesterday, change was the basic slogan of the time. A universal health system was built up. We decentralized more power to local governments. We revamped the educational system. We reformed the dowry laws. Women had to bring dowry to get married. It was terrible. There's a movie now that's going to the Oscars which tells about the terrible situation of women at that time. And we changed the laws to be equal rights for men and women. We brought meritocracy to how we employed civil servants. We built infrastructure throughout the country, bringing many areas of Greece out of isolation. This change in psychology also led Greece to become an important player in the region, which in turn facilitated the turnaround in US-Greek relations. Greece was no longer a passive onlooker. Greece was becoming a stabilizing factor, playing a pivotal role in the war-torn region of the Balkans and the Middle East. We also spearheaded, as Sotiris said, the integration of new members, Cyprus, our Balkan neighbors, even Turkey, into a family of common principles. This family, of course, is the European Union. Let me give you a few concrete examples of this can-do psychology Greece, because Greece is no big power, but what we do believe is that soft power, or the power of ideas, the power of a different vision, as was said earlier, Greece is a philosophy, or Greece is an idea, can be as powerful or more so than raw military power. If you inspire hearts and minds of people, this in the end is more powerful than any weapon to your head. But we also could leverage our position in the European Union in a positive way. I was appointed foreign minister in Greece when there was a serious crisis between us and Turkey. We were on the verge of war. I won't get into details, but I received an ultimatum from my counterpart, Ismail Cem. He was asking for very specific things. Well, we have our diplomats here. Initially, they were saying, don't answer, don't do anything. I said, well, what's our major priorities? I said, it's Turkey. Well, then let's take Turkey on. And I said, okay, let's have a dialogue. Let's sit down and talk. So we started talking. And we decided, okay, we have big issues. Cyprus, we delineated the continental shelf. Maybe we have some areas where we actually can work together. So we started talking, what about trade? What about athletics? What about energy? What about other areas where we might be able to work? And what happened is, a few months in these discussions, there was a major earthquake in Turkey, a huge earthquake. This was in the middle of the summer. So I heard about it, and then I said, okay, I'm going to take a risk. I am going to call on the Greek people and say, let's help the people, the victims of this earthquake. I didn't know what the response was, because there was an animosity between us. So I said, can everybody help? There was such a positive reaction. People went and gave blood. After 2 days, hospitals were calling me saying, tell people not to come. We cannot take so much blood. We don't have the capacity. And we sent we have a special force for earthquakes, firemen. We sent them to Turkey. And the day after they went there, they pulled out one young boy, 3 years old, alive from the rubble. The next day, all the Turkish newspapers wrote, "Thank you, Greece," in Greek. And then there was a big fire at an oil depot because of the earthquake. The Greek military went and helped the Turkish military put the fire out. At the end, the Turkish general pulled out his lapel and he gave it to the Greek general. This began a new era. We started what we called citizens diplomacy. Sometimes we think of diplomacy only at the level of our consulate or our ministers, but actually citizens do matter. I remember going to the Middle East, and first meeting, before I would meet with the officials, I'd meet with the women's organizations, and they were together, Palestinian and Israeli women. They had the solutions. They started meeting, Greeks and Turks. They started doing football together, basketball together, women's organizations together, business to business. And I was tracking this, and I had somebody coming to me every month and saying, how is it going? How is this citizens diplomacy going? After a few months, he stopped telling me. I called him and I said, what happened? He said, sorry, it's so much is going on, I cannot track it. So it was a really surge. And this is just a show that sometimes our own preconceptions and our own prejudices keep us back from attempting something new. Then what happened was we decided, okay, Turkey, we were vetoing Turkey to be a member of the European Union. But then we said, well, wait a minute. Actually, if Turkey is a part of the European Union, they will have to follow the principles of the European Union. So what if we say, yes, you can become a member of a club like the Sutter Club, but this had very specific principles, but you have to be a good neighbor. You have to follow human rights, minority rights. You have to respect religious rights like the ecumenical patriarch. You have to solve the Cyprus problem, and you can't threaten us and are in the Aegean. So we actually created the framework of a European Turkey. They were not always happy with that, but they were very happy to get the candidacy. So we started training the Turkish bureaucracy on how they should become part of Europe. We Greeks were training the Turks of how they could become part of the European Union. That changed the whole atmosphere. And then I realized with my counterpart, Ismail Cem, we were very honest about our problems. But then we started saying, okay, how do we build this up into a real trustworthy relationship? And then we can deal with the more difficult issues like Cyprus and the continental shelf. And we even went to the Middle East together. We decided there was a crisis in the Middle East. Not as bad as this one, but very bad. There were bombings. Yasser Arafat was alive. He was being bombed. There were problems in Gaza. The Church of Nativity was under siege. We decided, and when we went, we're going to go to Israel, Ariel Sharon said, if you go to Arafat, we won't accept you. If you come to us, then you can't go to Arafat. When we went together, he said, well, if Greece and Turkey are coming together, we can't say no. So we went both to Arafat and to Ariel Sharon, and we actually helped open up the siege, break the siege of the Nativity Church. But basically what it was a showing that, sometimes when people who have had long time conflicts can get together in a region and show that there is a different way, the power of this idea is much stronger, multiple than just one and one. It becomes 10 times more powerful. But we also tried to be innovative in many other ways. We had the Olympic Games coming. And the Olympic Games we know the origin of the Olympic Games. In ancient Greece, there were so many games. There were many games all over. Athens, Athenian games, Corinthian, all over. There were many, many games. So they didn't need one more game. What were the Olympic Games? It was actually a peace project when they went to the Delphic Oracle and said, how do we have peace? And the Delphic Oracle, very wise, these women, you see, much wiser than us men, said, do games and hold peace during the games. So this was a big athletic and cultural event, and it actually is the longest peace treaty in human history. It held for 1,100 years. So when we got the Olympic Games in 2004, we got in 97, I was foreign minister, I said, let's revive the real spirit and let us create an institution for the Olympic truce, which now exists. I'm vice president of that, and the head of it is the head of the IOC, Thomas Bach, right now. And we go around the world. First of all, we started by collecting signatures. The first signatures were mine and Ismail Cem from Turkey. Then we went to Arafat. Then we went to Simon Peres. Then we went to the Iranian. Then we went to the Chinese. Then we went to the Saudi Arabians. Clinton signed it. All the Europeans signed it. The Russians signed it. So Greece then all of a sudden had this global purpose of moving towards peace. And we were talking about at lunch about Trump's foreign policy. We actually helped him in his previous time with Korea. I went to China, I went to South Korea, Thomas Bach went to North Korea, and we were able to get a truce between North and South Korea during the games in Pyongyang a few years ago. The two Korean teams came together, they stopped all military exercises, and that opened up the door for Trump to go and start negotiations with North Korea. Unluckily, the result was not as what we would have wanted, but it shows the potential of ideas that we can have. So this is this can-do philosophy. Of course, we did show that Greece has great aspirations, but also great potential. Of course, the more recent challenges to these aspirations was the financial crisis. Erupted in the European Union's Eurozone in 2009, with Greece at the epicenter. When a new government came in 2004, and Greece, it unluckily mismanaged the economy. And we became the epicenter of the global crisis 2009. It started in Wall Street, but then we became the center a few months later, actually. I happened to be elected as prime minister at that time. My slogan was either we change or we sink. And we were sinking. It's not my intention to recall all the details. It's a complex, multi-layered issue. And it not only involves Greece, but also the European Union, the architecture of the euro, the financial institutions globally, and in the EU, of course. But a few observations. First of all, the crisis actually did have a positive impact on Greek-US relations. I worked closely with President Obama, and they were very helpful. They actually knew what to do. Now, the Germans didn't listen to the Americans. Had they done so, the crisis would have been over much quicker. I was talking to Volcker, former head of the Fed, and he was telling me, we would have solved this issue in 2 days. However, the Germans had this feeling of, okay, you've got to be punished. You know, you're guilty, you've got to be punished. So here we were, taking very difficult measures, but at the same time also had to be punished. I had frequent contact, as I said, with President Obama, and he would try to console me by saying, you know, I don't know, George, if you have a more difficult job than I do, actually. That was his way to sort of telling me, yeah, you know, keep up the spirit. The Obama administration was a trusted mediator, if you like, between Greece and the financial lenders. And when we were able to actually have a huge haircut, it was American lawyers and people who were experts in the United States that actually guided us and the European Union on how to do this. This, of course, served to further improve the public attitudes in Greece towards the United States. A second point has to do with Greece's current status on the world stage. During the financial crisis, Greece was often denigrated by critics as the problem child of Europe. So I believe the austerity measures that I had to enact were very painful. But Greeks actually were ready to make these sacrifices. We said, yes, we have to clean our house. We have to do things better. We have to fight clientelism. We have to fight the corruption. We have to be better organized. The problem was a different one. It was too easy to blame Greece for everything and to blame the Greeks, when this was not only a Greek problem. It was, yes, a Greek problem, but it was also a Euro problem. It was a problem of the financial system. But it was very easy for some leaders to simply blame Greece. So we were the lazy, ouzo drinking, Zorba dancing Greeks, which we are also, not lazy though. And of course, all the tourists from around the world just love to come and, you know, dance the Zorba and drink the ouzo and the wine. But I wanted to check the facts, and I think, you know, fact checking is important. Maybe some people don't believe it, but it is important. OECD. The facts are Greeks work more hours than any other European. Greeks work more hours than any other OECD country except for the Chileans and the South Koreans. yet we were seen as the lazy ones. Maybe that was more painful than the austerity measures, sense of dignity. So I had to take measures to bring back not only fiscal sustainability, but also our credibility. And I did so even saying to the Greek people, I know I will not be reelected because of these issues, but someone needs to make these changes. And if we're going to come out alive without going bankrupt, I will do the difficult job. And there were crucial changes. And today, Greece is widely regarded in Europe as the comeback kid. And to be sure, in Greece, as elsewhere, serious challenges, of course, remain on its political agenda. Problems arising from growing economic disparities, climate change, migrant flows, refugees, social welfare networks, over-tourism sometimes, all these have to be addressed. But today, according to the former Athens bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal, Alkman Granitsas, Greece is increasingly seen as a rising diplomatic and economic power in Southeastern Europe and in the Eastern Mediterranean. Let me cite a few facts that validate its growing reputation. On the diplomatic front, Greece was elected and is now serving a 2-year term on the United Nations Security Council. Greece recently led a European Union mission in the troubled waters of the Red Sea. On the economic front, Greece is emerging as an important regional energy hub. For the first time in its history, Greece is an energy exporter. In addition, it now hosts more data centers and telecommunication links than anywhere else in Southeastern Europe. And drawing on its long history in shipping, it is a growing hub for logistics, which is so vital to international trade and the global supply chain. And I see that Greece can become a complete carbon-free green country using its sun, wind, and geothermal energy sources. It could be a prototype. My third point has to do with the crisis, tells us about the state of Greek democracy. As you remember, during the austerity measures, we had repeated protests. Social upheaval gave birth to a neo-fascist party called the Golden Dawn. It even targeted the country's democracy itself, shouting, "Burn down the parliament." Yet remarkably enough, Greece's parliamentary democracy remains intact. It weathered the storm. In the 2019 elections, Greek voters turned their backs to the Golden Dawn, which lost all representation in parliament. Of course, much criticism can be given and taken, I think, and directed towards the country's political parties, because when we were facing the crisis, we did not have the unity as other countries of Portugal, Cyprus, and Ireland when they faced the same problems. But the fact of the matter is that in the end, the crisis was managed and finally overcome within the context of Greece's democratic institutions through debate, parliamentary processes, and free elections. And given Greece's long history of civil war and military dictatorship, the fact itself deserves greater recognition than it has received. In the year that just ended, Greece reached an important milestone. In 2024, Greece marked an unprecedented 50 years of uninterrupted democratic rule for the first time in its modern history. It showed its resilience in face of severe stress, a test posed by the financial crisis. Greece's parliamentary republic demonstrated, I believe, the fundamental commitment of the Greek people in maintaining a democratic way of life. At the same time, Greek democracy, as in the case for any democracy, remains a work in progress and need of many reforms to improve its performance and responsiveness to the needs of people. But let me close by returning to the issue of Greek-US relations and the importance of a foreign policy to the health and maintenance of democracy. Rightly understood, the exercise of foreign policy requires a statesmanship and an unrelenting effort to reconcile national interests with the need for international cooperation and peace based on the rule of law. At the same time, there are many issues around the world. Democracy, where is democracy going? I am in the Council of Europe, we're 46 countries. I'm rapporteur for democracy. And we are seeing an erosion of institutions and trust in democracy. Issues concerning welfare, equality, and social justice concerning the environment, decarbonizing the economy, and finally, issues of peace and war. So the magnitude of the challenges are huge. Today, we hear voices in the political ether that seem to be advocating foreign policies based on the proposition that might makes right. I would argue that the future well-being of mankind depends on working steadfastly to realize the opposite proposition, that right makes might. The actions that the citizens of the world take in the coming years, both individually and collectively, will decide which of these two propositions ultimately prevails. In today's multipolar world, the critical question is whether this reality can evolve into a system of multilateral cooperation. Can we establish agreements and laws respected by all, rather than descending into competition and conflict? From my travels and my experience, I've seen many countries around the world. Despite diverse histories and interests, people share universal needs. The need for security, the need for survival, self-determination, freedom, community, progress, prosperity, and justice. But the challenge is whether these values will be pursued through war and violence or through peace and dialogue, through respect for others or for dominance of the powerful. So as we enter a new phase defined by these huge technological advancements, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing, the central dilemma is clear. Will these tools address global challenges like climate change and equitable prosperity, or will they exacerbate power imbalances and competition? For Greece, this era calls for strengthening autonomy and self-sufficiency in critical areas like energy and defense, while fostering democratic and participatory governance. And I believe that the types of problems we have, we need more democratic participation, not less. And I've been working on this in the Council of Europe. We need to have citizens own the process. We need to tell that democracy is not every 4 years, it's every day. That's not easy. The ancient Greeks knew that. They knew that democracy was actually not a simple thing. It was a duty. It was not simply a right. And I think we've lost that. So the new great idea for Hellenism must be rooted in values rather than in geography, not expanding our geographical boundaries, but our principles. Greece has always been seen by the outside world as a bearer of discourse and dialogue on the major political and ethical issues that humanity faces. This dialogue of cultures is more than ever necessary. That is why I believe Greece can become a hub, a center for such great global discussions. And its foreign policy, it can become a voice of reason in a world facing ethical and existential dilemmas, advocating that the powers we have developed, such as the expanding technological revolution, be put to use to benefit humanity rather than deepen divisions and spark conflicts. So some might view this vision as unrealistic, but I believe it is the only truly realistic solution for humanity's survival. As we were talking earlier with Jerry Brown, he brought up the issue of nuclear war. If we get into conflicts, it's not going to be a Second World War. It's going to be the end of human civilization. But it's also the idea of politics. You know, when the ancient Greeks were talking about politics, they were talking about a can-do possibility also, this confidence. What is politics? What is the word politics? Well, an ancient Greek word, it is indeed a sense, a realization, even a revelation that we, the people, can take our fate in our own hands. We do not have to rely on a tyrant or a high priest or a king. We can decide ourselves what type of society we want to build. And that's a huge responsibility, but it's also a great opportunity. Politics, the word politics, is not what we think of today. Today it's like, and I've been in politics many years, it's like walking a tightrope between reading the daily polls, running around for donations to your campaign, and tweeting sound bites that might bring you attention or even fame. That's not politics. That's not really politics. Politics, in the real sense, needs to be about imagination, imagining a different and better future, and working together to accomplish that future. And democracy was an innovation. You know, we often see innovation in here in the tech world as something for industry, for high tech, for corporations, or for R&D departments. Yet politics is a continual struggle to innovate new ways of solving social and economic problems. We are, in the real sense of politics, we are innovators. But as democracy is an innovation, it is also a work in progress. We need to revisit our democratic institutions, and are they working for us as we wish? Are they captured by money, by oligarchs, social media platforms? Are they responsive to the needs of our citizens? Do our citizens participate? Can they? Do they want to? And why not? These are questions I've been grappling with over the past years. I have actually been appointed as the Council of Europe as General Rapporteur for Democracy, as I said. And I've been researching new ways of strengthening and revitalizing our democratic institutions, such as through greater participative practices, citizen assemblies, or the e-agora. Let me give you just one example. Ireland. So Ireland was debating about abortion, a very controversial issue. It's a Catholic country. The politicians were actually very worried to touch the issue. So what did they do? They took an ancient Greek concept, which was you were chosen by lot, randomly. So in ancient Greece, you would be chosen by lot randomly to serve in government and to propose legislation for 6 months, and then you would be renewed by another lot. So this concept, which actually some people in Stanford, like James Fishkin, are working on over these years. So the Irish said, okay, let's try it. So the parliament decided to choose, I don't know, it was about 200-300 randomly selected citizens. And they said, sit there for 6 months, we'll give you any experts you want, and then you come up with a solution. And these were randomly, so there were scientists, there were housewives, there were postmen, there were workers, there were business people. They sat there, well, over the weekends, I think it was, 6 months and deliberated, listened to all the ideas. And they came up and they said, you know, we actually do have to change the Constitution because for this and this reason. Then they went to a referendum and they changed the Constitution, making abortion legal. So what we're saying now is maybe there are new ways we can really rethink and renovate our democratic practices. So I'm now working to make Athens a hub, a center for research and training, and how we can renovate our democratic institutions. And I'm glad both with Angelo and with Mark Wheeler here, we've been talking about how we can work together with Sacramento State to possibly cooperate and make Athens not only a hub for Athens, but for the whole region with the support of your work. But this also goes to show that Greece, Hellenism, with its history and tradition, has the potential to lead in this new era, becoming a beacon of culture, education, and cooperation. So let us give Greece the role it deserves, not as a spectator in history, but as a creator of a better future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So, a few questions, certainly. Yeah, definitely.
We have time for a few questions. Do we need to use the microphone or can we?
Maybe just a bit of water.
Do we have a microphone?
Στη μας κιόλας.
Yes. Thank you for that tour de force overview and our intellectual spread, democracy and other principles. Any questions from the audience? We do have a microphone. Don't fight for the microphone. Anyone? Any questions?
Okay, I have a volunteer question right here. What do you see the future of Greek-Turkish relations right now?
A good question. We had quite a long period of quiet and I would say good relations. I think, in any relation, and particularly if it's a bit of a controversial issue, in a relationship in a family, you have to keep investing in it. And I think what happened was two things happened. First of all, we started thinking that this would be, we could just let things go with the flow rather than really investing in it. Then there was a coup in Turkey also, and Erdogan changed a lot in his character and his style. And then Europe also became very wary of thinking about a possibility of Turkey coming into the European Union. All these factors changed the whole situation. And we had quite a few aggressive acts from Turkey. One of them, of course, was delineating the economic zone from Turkey to Libya, which crosses our waters, just the last 2 years ago. But again, what happened was, I believe that both Turkey felt that it was becoming isolated from Europe and even from the United States because of its stance. It was a change of government and a change of ministers there. And then, of course, there was a huge earthquake last year or 14 months ago, I can't remember, 2 years ago, the southern part of Turkey, which also hit Syria. Devastating earthquake. Again, Greece came to aid, having learned, I guess, from the previous time too. That again brought out a sentiment in the public, and that helped to open up again a new dialogue. So now Prime Minister Mitsotakis and President Erdogan are meeting, they are talking. I'm not sure where it's going to go. And of course, Turkey now has become quite powerful in the region with Syria, with the changes in Syria. They've been instrumental in overthrowing Assad, and the regime in Syria now is very pro-Turkish. So we will see. I think we need to continue dialogue. We need to communicate to Turkey that it has to solve these problems, whether it's Cyprus or whether it's the continental shelf, and in doing so, doing it in a way which is just and according to international law. So, for example, what we are saying is, let's go to the Court of Hague and decide on the delineation. In the Aegean, we know where the borders are, but the continental shelf, which is the bed of the sea, has not been delineated between the two countries. Now, that's not easy to do between two countries, but we can go to the courts and they will, with their experience, because they've done it in many parts of the world, they can delineate it and say, okay, this is what Turkish continental shelf and this is the Greek continental shelf. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's what we have said. So if that is done, that would be solving one problem. Now in Cyprus, we've had 2 or 3 attempts. We've come quite close. I think in the end, we need to let the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots find their own way. And I've always told the Turks, well, if you have your occupation army on the north of Cyprus, we from Greece and you from Turkey, we need to let Cyprus alone to solve its problem. Of course, with the help of the United Nations. So we'll see. It's still up for grabs. Thank you.
Michael, we have a question over there. Do you want to take the microphone?
It's great to have you in Sacramento.
Thank you very much.
We have microphones now. Can you hear me? So the American political system has been described as a return to the era of robber barons. You may recall the titans of industry in 19th century, or 20th century. Has Greece undertaken any measures to try to dismantle or bring some degree of control to oligarchs, commercial oligarchs that exist in your country, just as we're trying to tackle the oligarchs in our country, whether they be information-based or commercial-based, et cetera? You had any thoughts on how we can learn how Greece has undertaken such measures?
That's a very good question and a difficult one. And as a matter of fact, in the Council of Europe, we've now have 2 conferences on the issue of money in politics and private powers and rule of law. Both of them are focused quite centrally, not only around oligarchs or oligarchies. The issue came up because the European Union wants to now in as members Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And the European Union puts prerequisites to get into the club, as I said earlier. They added one prerequisite which didn't exist for other countries: de-oligarchization. So get rid of your oligarchs Ukraine, get rid of your oligarchs Moldova, get rid of your oligarchs Georgia. So the Council of Europe I work with is sort of a precursor to becoming part of the Union, of the European Union, because we follow the democratic procedures of these countries and we give them scores, basically, if they're doing well or not. But when we started talking about that, said, they're not only oligarchs in those three countries, there are oligarchs many other parts. And if we want to talk to them about their oligarchs, then maybe we should talk about our oligarchs too. I had to deal with the oligarchs because that was actually the financial crisis in Greece was, we call it a financial crisis, but it actually was more of a democracy crisis. Why? Because had we had the institutions in place, we would not have had so much waste in spending and a lot of corruption too, unluckily. I was accused of talking about corruption in Greece because people said, you're telling the Greeks are corrupt? I said, no, the system has to change. It's not the Greeks that are corrupt. The system has to change. And when the Germans were attacking me about corruption, you are corrupt, I said, listen, is your DNA fascist? No, you're not fascist DNA. You had a fascist system. You are not born fascists. So don't call us corrupt as a people. So we got into a bit of a fight there. But it is the system. And there were people that didn't want to lose power. So I had to fight against them. And that was one of my fights. So I'll just give you one of the examples of the type of corruption we had and how these sometimes corporations work. We had a huge deficit and a huge debt. One of it had to do with the health system. So in the Greek health system, people pay into it. It's a universal health system. They pay into the insurance and their pension system. It's the pension system also. So 1/3 is by employers, 1/3 employees, and 1/3 government. So we all pay into it and cover everybody. The doctors that were prescribing medicine, what they did is they were over-prescribing medicine. They were prescribing expensive medicines that weren't necessary, and they were prescribing diagnostic tests that were not necessary. And they were getting kickbacks from the big corporations. So we sat down and we said, okay, how do we deal with this? I said, okay, let's use high tech, or not high tech, but just tech. Let's make them digital. So all prescriptions have to be digital and they have to be checked without names. We were protecting privacy and so on, but we could check, okay, this person has this ailment, what medicine did you actually prescribe? Well, we set up the system. The night before, my secretary from the ministry called me up. She said, we can't do it. I said, why can't we do it? She said, the doctors say they don't know how to use computers. I said, are they on contract? He said, yes, they're on contract. Okay, anybody who doesn't use a computer, we sever the contract. In 2 weeks, 95% of them learned how to use computers. We cut the cost by 50%. It was about 4 billion. That may not sound very much, but that's as much as we make in property taxes in Greece. Now, that's just one example of the power of some of these corporations globally. And it also has created huge inequalities. I also had another problem. So the IMF would come to me and the European Union said, okay, you've got to deal with your debt and your deficit, so raise taxes. I said, okay, I'll do that. But I said, I have a problem. These banks that and use funds and all this, that you want me to raise taxes, they are helping the richest in Greece take their money out of Greece into some tax havens. So who am I going to tax? I'm going to tax the middle class and the wage earners who can't move their money into the Panama or to Jersey Islands or wherever else in the world. So I asked them to have and I actually went to Obama for this, and there was also another thing with CDSs. I said, I will tax, but I want you to capture this tax. If we can't capture that, it's we're taxing people who can't really afford it, and people who can afford it just take their money out. So we need what we have in this globalized system is we used to have a system, and particularly in Europe, but with the big deal, what's it called, the Roosevelt deal that he had. There was a system where employers and employees and the government basically said, okay, we're a capitalist country. We want people to have profit, but we want to make sure that there's also good wages, good health system, good environment, good working conditions. So there has to be a contribution from those who make a lot of money. With a globalized system, what we have is capital can leave the country in many ways. It could be taking a factory to China or to Vietnam or to wherever. And therefore, it doesn't have a sense of responsibility to its nation. And what that means is that there has been a huge accumulation of wealth. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you look at Oxfam, they do a series of reviews. The amount of massive concentration of wealth is, as you said, more than barons, whatever they call them, robber barons of the older times. But that is also translated into political power. Because then this power, they buy up media, they buy up platforms. Well, we know Elon Musk. They buy up football teams. That's not bad necessarily, but I mean, sometimes they do it just for, not if it's for honor, it's okay. But if it's for political pressure, which in many countries they use it for political pressure, it makes it, and then they buy up other things too. And there's a lot of corruption too. It could be lobbying or it could be outright corruption. So what we are seeing is this concentration of power undermining our democracies. And I think this is one of the backlashes people are seeing towards our democratic institutions. We expect from our politicians much more than they can do. How can one politician in one country deal with this globalized, if you like, power? But this is where we need to work together. And there was some discussion about global taxes now on the tech industry. So these are some of the big issues we need to work. There's another report also about how these oligarchs around the world have not helped also in the climate change issue. They have been stifling the changes that are necessary because there are special interests in that, and they have a lot of power. So if we talk about democracy in the ancient times, one of the reasons, there were many reasons for democracy. One was for peaceful debate, to solve problems through debate and not through violence. But the other one was not to allow for concentration of power in the hands of a few. Now we have it. So this is one thing that we are undermining. How can we deal with it? Well, it's not easy, but I think being aware of the problem and actually telling some of these people, listen, if this isn't solved, you're going to face revolutions around the world. They may be in different forms. They may not be always violent, but you will get all kinds of leaders and all kinds of changes and all kinds of things that will not help our societies. We need to make more societies more equitable, more just, and people feeling that their basic needs are met. I mean, the US is the richest country in the world. Oh, it is. I mean, you shouldn't have such inequality here. I mean, I've been to San Francisco. I mean, you can see some of the amazing inequalities and problems. And I don't believe in the theory that, okay, if somebody is poor, he wants to be poor. It could be circumstances in life. could be where you were born. You know, still today in our planet, the basic determinant of your success in life is where you were born. So we need to create societies that can nurture, can support, and help people move ahead. But I don't have the solution. You know, as we were saying earlier today, you know, when politicians say we don't have solutions, you're not elected. But I think we have to be honest. We don't have the solutions. We know where we want to go, but we can find the solutions all together. This is where we want debate. This is where we want democratic participation, because the wisdom of the collective is much better than my personal wisdom. Thank you.
The last question?
Yes, you are.
Okay. All right, Mr. Papandreou, thank you for being here. I hope this question is much easier than the last one. My first question is, have you considered re-entering Greek politics? And my second one is, what can we as Greek Americans do to help you and the country? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I've always been in politics, whether I've been in officially or not. I mean, I grew up, I think I became much more aware of politics, not so much when I was in Berkeley and so on, but when the dictatorship took over, I was following, and they came and they arrested my father. They arrested my grandfather, but he was living in another house. We thought that there might be a dictatorship, so actually my father had some guns in the house. Well, you can't really outdo a military with a few guns, but I remember helping my father. I hid him on the roof of the house. That was one of my hiding places. So when the military came and broke down the door, actually, my grandfather from my mother's side, American, World War I veteran, he opened up the door and there was the military. And, you know, as a former veteran of the World War I, he just slammed the door closed and came up and said, "Hey, there's about 2 a.m. And they started breaking it down. So we all woke up. I helped my father up to hide. I had a double-barrel shotgun and holding it, and I realized, you know, having watched a lot of cowboy movies, we were outgunned. So I hid the gun, luckily. Finally, after about 45 minutes, they were searching the house. They found me on the balcony. They put a gun to my head. They said, "We're going to kill you if you don't tell us where your father is." The guy that came was a little bit shorter than me, so I got a little bit of a, you know, sense of strength and confidence. I said, he's at my grandfather's place. He's not here. But my father, of course, heard this. I was very worried, and he said, don't kill my son. I give up. I took him away. We didn't know if he was going to be alive or not. Finally, 8 months later, after many of you helped, he was released and went into exile. But that, of course, experience really was deep in me, and I said, okay, I'm going to fight against this authoritarian type of society. We need democracy. We need human rights. We were fighting for very simple things, you know, the right to be able to speak, the right to be able to vote, the right to be able to have a democratic society. So I've been in politics, as you said, all the time, and whether it's been in officially or not. And now I'm, of course, a deputy of Greece, of the Greek Parliament. But I believe that the diaspora has a huge role to play. We haven't tapped into the capacity of the diaspora as we should have. That is my feeling. I feel that in Greece, and there's always been a bit of a tension, you know, let's be honest, between the diaspora Greeks and the Greeks in Greece who have not been in the diaspora. Maybe because there are certain, you know, establishments, certain powers, they're not so, say, who are these Greek Americans or Greek Germans or Greek Australians coming to Greece? But I think that, and this has been going on since even the revolution in 1821, there were the Αυτόχθονες, the ones of Greece, and the Heterochthonες, which were from outside of Greece. And the outside of Greeks who were from the diaspora were very instrumental in helping the revolution and bringing the Enlightenment. The Greeks inside Greece, of course, had been under oppression and they didn't have the same education. So this was a big difference. But I think we need, and if you want, we need to keep pressuring the Greek political parties, and I do this often, but I was actually responsible for Greek diaspora at my first post with Melina Mercouri, and I went around the world to meet with the Greek diaspora. We have great diaspora all over the world. We need to find openings. We need to, I think we were talking with Angela, one real important way is if we could open up our universities to make them much more open and flexible and resilient, and allow for thousands of Greeks who are either professionals or either academics or either researchers to come. They could come for the summer, they could come for a year, they could come for a sabbatical, they could come for 5 years, they could come permanently. So really make Greece a hub for education. And these institutions actually become a catalyst for renewing Greece, for changing Greece, for bringing new ideas. I think that'd be amazing. But I just want to tell you one or two of some of the amazing people we have. I remember going to New Zealand. I was welcomed by a Maori. He rubbed my nose. He danced, rubbed my nose with his nose. He was half Greek, half Maori. Then South Africa, one of the most iconic figures of South Africa, George Bezos, no relationship to Jeff Bezos. George Bezos was the lawyer of Mandela, of Nelson Mandela. He fought for Mandela all the years, and he would go to the prison of Mandela, bringing him Aristotle and Plato, and Mandela read ancient Greek philosophy. And I think he was very wise, both from his experience, but I think the Greek philosophy helped him a little bit in how he dealt with the problem in South Africa. So we have amazing people, and of course, Angelo is one of them, and we thank you, Angelo, for all you've done and are still doing for Greece and for Hellenism. So thank you. And thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all. Whoa! Enjoy your dessert. Please stay, enjoy each other's company, and have a good evening. Thank you.